Hello and welcome to the James Bond Countdown. Before I dive in here, I'd like to briefly address my prolonged absence. It was really sort of a perfect storm of several different things. Initially, life just kinda got busy and I simply didn't have time to work on new videos. And then, the news came down that Amazon had taken control of Bond, and that actually made me lose my passion for a while. But my biggest setback came soon after that when I lost someone very close to me. Someone who was a key figure in my Bond fandom, as it just so happens. So I do apologize for vanishing like an Aston Martin Vanquish, but I'm certain you can all understand. Rest assured, I love this channel, I'm grateful for everyone who subscribes to it, and no matter how long I happen to step away from it, the James Bond Countdown will always return. Now, in case you couldn't tell from the title, I'm doing something a little bit different with this video. Rather than one of my usual ranked lists, I will be giving you my personal thoughts and feelings on a singular topic. This is actually a segment I've been thinking about introducing to the channel for a while, though I never would have thought that this would be the inaugural topic. But here we are. After 60 years of stewardship, the Broccoli family and Eon Productions have indeed ceded creative control of the James Bond film franchise to Amazon MGM Studios. And as I just alluded to, I initially felt too gutted to even consider talking about this. But then I decided that venting it all out in a video was the only way I would ever be able to properly cope with news as devastating as this is. So join me as I try my best to articulate what I think this means for the future of Bond. Without further ado, this is a Countdown Commentary. February 20th, 2025 is, I believe, a day that will live in infamy for 007 fans. But in order to understand just what happened to our beloved Bond that day, and why, we must first understand what has happened to the film industry in the 21st century.
The problem is the studio executives. The problem is that the studios used to be owned by people that cared about the movies. Now they're corporations. They don't love movies, they don't go to movies, they don't know what a movie is. And they do focus groups to try to determine who will go see a movie.
And Hollywood does that.
And Hollywood does that. And they try to change the story to fit what they think what the polling results are. And you can't do that. That's not the way you make movies. Because it is not a business. You know, it's an art form.
That was George Lucas, just over 25 years ago, essentially warning us about what the future of the movie industry would be, particularly as it pertains to big-budget studio blockbusters. You see, throughout the 1990s, some very consequential deregulation occurred, which led to tech and telecom companies like AOL and AT&T buying Hollywood studios and dumping debt into them, which then started the practice of dismantling those studios and selling off scraps, basically trying to run them like MBA-type businesses. This seismic shift in the film industry was incredibly frustrating for creative professionals like George Lucas, but it was just the tip of the iceberg, because with the dawn of streaming in the 2010s, the industry would see an even harder shift, this time at the hands of Silicon Valley.
Silicon Valley.
And their damage extends even beyond the film world. So-called disruptors are the biggest blow to our society in a long time.
I think disruptors recognize each other.
No,
yes.
you've used that word before, disruptors. What does that mean?
These insufferable pricks have sent shockwaves through every single industry. Tech bros who had a quote-unquote revolutionary idea received a hideous amount of money from venture capitalists, burned through all of it while building debt to undercut existing businesses, then forced those businesses out or forced them to change just to turn around and skyrocket prices. Uber did it with taxis, Airbnb did it with hotels, and streaming did it with film and television. It's a very simple and very shitty business practice that has ruined our economy. So that's sort of a broad summation of how we ended up with movie studios owned and operated by people who know absolutely nothing about making movies. Now, before I go any further, I should probably explain why I feel uniquely qualified to speak with such conviction on this particular topic. You see, I don't really talk about myself on this channel outside of my Bond fandom, but in this discussion it will provide some relevant context for you to know that I actually work in the film industry. And while I won't tell you exactly what I do, I will share that I work closely alongside directors, producers, and actors. I mention this to tell you that I have seen firsthand what today's filmmakers are up against when dealing with these studios. I've sat in on the meetings, I've been CC'd on the email chains, I know how these executives think, I know how they make their business decisions, and I know what motivates their creative decisions. Which feels like an oxymoron because believe me when I tell you these people do not have a single creative bone in their bodies. But more on that later, because in order to fully appreciate what makes studio control so bad for Bond, we must first reflect on what made the Broccoli dynasty so great for Bond. And in juxtaposing the two, I suspect we'll end up with a pretty accurate prediction for how the future of this franchise is going to play out. First of all, let me just say that any self-proclaimed Bond fan who understates the value and importance of the Broccoli family's reign is not a true student of this franchise and its history. At this point, the Broccoli's contributions to the James Bond films are equally, if not more important than Ian Fleming's. The vast majority of what people associate with Bond, and certainly what they expect from it, was established by the movies, not the books. The whole Bond formula, that winning formula with the checklist of everything people want from Bond, was established by the movies. It is as much the Broccoli formula as it is the Bond formula. Don't get me wrong, I have the utmost respect for the source material, and it's still essential lore to understand the essence of Bond, but under the guidance of the Broccoli's, the films have carved a legacy all their own. The best way to delineate this is to recognize just how much of the franchise's success can be directly attributed to their decisions and the decisions of those who they vouched for. So let's go over some of the biggest decisions they made. Decisions that would have been different if the studios had been calling the shots for the last 60 years instead of the Broccoli's. For starters, the studios probably would not have cast Sean Connery, George Lazenby, Timothy Dalton, or Daniel Craig as James Bond. Literally 2/3 of the Bonds were chosen because the Broccoli's had a gut feeling about them.
It was like there wasn't anyone else. That kept freaking the studio out because we kept saying there is no one else. We don't want anyone else. And they kept trying to get us to meet people.
Studios are risk-averse, meaning they tend to go for the obvious choices because they see it as safer. The Broccoli's trusted their instincts, and it more than paid off. The key crux of Bond becoming a cultural phenomenon in the 60s was the obsession with the man himself, as defined by Connery's portrayal of him. He brought an electrifying magnetism to the part that was entirely his own. The way he moved, the way he talked, the looks he gave, the reality he lent. His unique instincts were why people became obsessed, and Craig had much the same effect nearly a half-century later. As for Lazenby and Dalton, they may not have been appreciated in their day, but they certainly are now. Equally as important as the Broccoli's faith in unknowns was their conviction that Bond was bigger than any one actor, and their determination to prove the series could carry on in spite of recasting. When Connery first stepped away, they did not hesitate to move on to Lazenby, and when Lazenby didn't work out, the studio desperately pressured them to bring back Connery, because they saw the disappointment of Lazenby as affirmation that you couldn't recast. But Cubby Broccoli and Harry Saltzman were unwavering. They knew it could work, they tried again with more, and the Bond phenomenon was reborn. Hand in hand with Eon's dedication to periodically recast was their courage to recalibrate tonally. Even at times when the series was wildly successful, they had the creative integrity to know when it needed to go in a different direction, which is in direct opposition with the studio mindset that as long as it continues to make money, you don't dare risk changing it. Similar to the Broccoli's confidence in tonal shifts was their determination to update and reinvent the series for new eras. Time and time again, they faced discourse over whether Bond was still relevant.
I think you're a sexist, misogynist dinosaur. A relic of the Cold War.
Point taken.
And time again, they proved that there was always a place for Bond in the modern day. Oftentimes, they had to do it in conjunction with rescuing the franchise from a period of financial strife at the studio. Yet another tenet of the Broccoli rule, which I think will prove very pertinent moving forward, was trusting the creative vision of their collaborators. Yes, the Broccoli's had final say on everything, so they didn't offer complete creative freedom per se, but as long as there was a mutual understanding of the franchise's ground rules, they afforded filmmakers all the latitude in the world to be themselves. Just look at the first 3 Craig films. You go from the adrenaline-pumping escapism of Martin Campbell, to the art house sensibilities of Mark Forster, to the somber patriotism of Sam Mendes. For better or worse, hit or miss, the Broccoli's chose their collaborators because they believed in what that person could bring to Bond. Unlike most franchises nowadays, where the choice of director, writer, or anyone else is entirely arbitrary because those individuals aren't actually given any authorship. And perhaps the most recent testament to the difference between Broccoli rule and studio authority was their commitment to give Bond films exclusive, wide, theatrical releases. The guarantee of a swift streaming release undermines a movie's ability to perform well in theaters. The Broccoli's were no doubt keenly aware of this fact, and their resistance to streaming's siren song ensured that Bond's big screen success would never dwindle. So those are just some of the Broccoli's many judgment calls, and they're all things that fundamentally shaped both the popularity and longevity of this franchise, things which the studios were not in favor of, and mostly back in the days when the studios in question still had respectable people in charge. Can you imagine what it will be like now? But as I've already been alluding to a little bit, it's not just the things the Broccoli's did that we can't count on anymore. It's the things they didn't do. Something they had which studios are incapable of is restraint. We used to know that there were certain places we never had to worry about them going. Certain worst-case scenarios that Bond would always be safe from in the hands of the Broccoli's. But not anymore, and never again will we feel that comfort and security, not only as it pertains to their safeguarding, but all of their sure-handed leadership. Everything we've come to know about how this franchise operates is null and void. 60 years of precedent is out the window, and it's never, ever coming back. And that permanence is what makes this all so gutting. Speaking from my own recent experience, it's not unlike grieving the loss of a loved one in that way. All this to say, I firmly believe that we wouldn't still have the Bond franchise today had it not been for the guidance of the Broccoli family. And look, I'm not going to pretend that I love every direction they ever took the franchise in. I didn't always agree with their creative choices on a film-by-film basis, but there was a certain sincerity in their creative stumbles because they always had good intentions, and I always trusted that they would do what's best for Bond in the long term. They had an uncanny ability to right the ship whenever it started to go astray. Again, trusting their instincts, being strategic. On every possible occasion when the franchise could have died away, they knew exactly what to do to keep it alive, and they did so without wavering. Their grasp of the big picture is what made them so great. So through some combination of business acumen and sheer moxie, this charming, plucky little family with an independent production company nurtured something truly unique within film history. And as long as they stayed in control, it felt like Bond could go on forever. Which brings me to my next talking point. Why did they give up control? It's a confounding question that I've tied myself in knots trying to answer, and I think it really says something that the news of their surrender astonished not only us fans, but many of those who have actually worked with the Broccolis on this franchise, including a couple of the Bonds themselves. Timothy Dalton and Pierce Brosnan both happened to be promoting new projects last year, so naturally they were asked for their reactions, and they each offered some fairly thoughtful insights. Dalton actually talked about it at length in a few different interviews where he both sang Barbara Broccoli's praises and bemoaned what her departure might mean for Bond. Full disclosure, I'm paraphrasing from the lot of them. I was very, very surprised and shocked. Barbara is a wonderful person and a wonderful producer with James Bond very much in her heart, as was her father, Cubby Broccoli, who I got on with very well and liked a lot. She's learned so much from her dad. Her dad was like iron about the Bond shows. He'd got it started in the first place, and he made sure that what was in the films was what he wanted. Around a Bond movie, everyone's got an opinion. That tends to make something less special. But if you keep it to people who know what they're doing and know what they want, then it will sharpen up and be good. Barbara had that. I have no idea what Amazon would do with it, but it is a damn fine series of movies. I was watching it when I was young. We all were. It's been part of our lives, so anything that threatens it is kind of sad. They'll be doing their best to make a lot of money, so hopefully they will make good movies. Brosnan's comments were of a similar sentiment, remarking, "In this world that is moving so fast now, the takeover does come with a certain lament. I thought it was coming for some time, I guess, but I think it was the right decision for Barbara and Michael. It takes great courage for them to let go. I hope that Amazon handles the work and the character with dignity and imagination and respect." He also asserted that he's very proud to have worked with Barbara and Michael and offered the bittersweet consolation that everything changes, everything falls apart. Be that as it may, it doesn't change the fact that the Broccoli's have always been very vocal about considering themselves the protectors of Bond, that no matter what, they'd never allow their cherished family heirloom to be corrupted by impetuous figureheads and greedy corporations. One of their favorite mantras has always been, "Don't let temporary people make permanent decisions." And there's one story in particular that Barbara tells in the fabulous Everything or Nothing documentary, which really leaves you pleading, how could she have done this?
He had so much advice. He said to me, "You know, the most important thing, Barbara, is don't let the outside forces screw it up. It's all there. This wonderful world of James Bond, this fantastic team. Just keep that, just keep that going."
He instilled a lot of confidence in us, and I still feel I carry him with me, every day.
I'll be damned if that clip doesn't hit like a shot through the heart now. How does one even begin to reconcile that sort of resolve with an act which seems to blatantly contradict it? It's a vexing quandary that's had me going back and forth between trying to empathize with Barbara and feeling something like this.
You were the chosen one! It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them! Bring balance to the Force, not leave it in darkness!
Okay, let me dial it back for a second, because I want to make it abundantly clear that I am not trying to vilify Barbara. I always have and always will worship at the altar of Barbara Broccoli, but it is incredibly difficult not to feel like her decision was a betrayal of some kind, be it to the fans, to her father's dream, her family's legacy, or to James Bond himself. And for what it's worth, I would bet that feeling is not lost on her. I'd think this was the most difficult decision she has ever had to make, and that she will probably always regret it to a certain extent. But the fact that she chose to make this decision in spite of that regret tells me there had to be some deeply personal reasons that she made it. I mean, just think how much had to have been weighing on her to lead her to do the one thing her father told her never to do. I'm sure she had to do a lot of soul searching and probably consulted with every last person in her life who knows her best. Hopefully one day we'll get the whole story as to what exactly happened and why, but until that day comes, we'll just have to draw our own conclusions. If I had to give it my best guess based on what I know about her and what we've learned in the time since all of this happened, I would say she faced an impasse of her personal journey with this franchise and what the future would have looked like had she stayed and tried to work with Amazon. And that appears to be the prevailing theory among insiders as well. Longtime Bond casting director Debbie McWilliams recently announced her retirement from that role after working on every film since For Your Eyes Only, and she offered some parting words which seemed to validate my assumptions, albeit in rather broad terms. I have worked closely with Barbara and Michael for over 40 years and had the most amazing career, traveling all over the world in search of wonderful actors. I am sad to see the end of this era, but totally understand why it has happened. Prior to Amazon acquiring MGM, Barbara and Michael had a good working relationship with the studio and always held the final decisions. Producing a Bond film takes at least 2 years of their lives with little time for anything else. And with Michael retiring, I think Barbara did not have the appetite to shoulder the burden alone. She has so many other interests, especially with her theater projects. So let me now offer my more in-depth analysis of the proverbial Sophie's choice that Barbara presumably faced. Starting on the personal side, one must acknowledge the distinction between how we perceive the dynastic rule of this franchise and how it must have felt from the inside. We went from Cubby and Harry, to just Cubby, to Cubby and Michael, to Michael and Barbara, and I think most fans believed the succession would just continue through the family by way of Michael's son Greg. He'd been an active participant in the family business for 20 years, most recently working as an associate producer, which is essentially the same path Barbara followed on the way to taking up the mantle. So given that, and the fact that Michael's now in his 80s, it seemed like the stage was set to go from Michael and Barbara to Barbara and Greg. But what we failed to consider was that maybe Greg wasn't considered ready to step into his father's shoes, or perhaps never even wanted to take up the mantle. So that would have left Barbara on her own after a lifetime of doing this side by side with her family. See, we as fans have the luxury of being selfish and thinking only of what's best for the franchise, but not necessarily what's best for the human beings behind it. Perhaps it was unfair of us to expect Barbara to go on producing these movies until she dropped dead, which is damn near what her father did.
Are you still as enthusiastic about making them as ever?
Yes, I'm enthusiastic about it. I'm 80 years old, and I'm still enthusiastic about making Bond. Bond will go on forever.
But Bond was Cubby's dream. She just inherited it. And I don't think any of us can even begin to understand the complex and deeply personal feelings associated with that, which might be why Barbara never brought her own daughter into the fold, even though she does seem to have toyed with the idea of a film career. Perhaps Barbara wanted her to have more of a choice than she ever did, because I'm sure there might be a part of her that always felt like she never had the luxury of having her own dream. Now, I'm by no means suggesting she was forced into it or that she didn't want to do it, but by her own admission, there was never a time when she considered not doing it. So I get the impression it was just sort of assumed by everyone in the family. It is possible to love something and still feel trapped by it, and I suspect that may well have been the culmination of Barbara's journey with Bond, which no doubt put her in an impossibly difficult position when faced with the notion of moving on. And that's where I think the other piece of this equation comes in. Eon vs. Amazon might just stand as the quintessential microcosm of the clash between the 20th century Hollywood of big screens and big swings and the 21st century film industry ruled by Silicon Valley firms that prize data, algorithms, and streaming subscriptions. The tensions between Eon and Amazon were very widely publicized before, during, and after their negotiations. Variety, The Hollywood Reporter, and The Wall Street Journal all had extensive feature stories exploring the behind-the-scenes drama, and the details are nothing short of maddening. As one might expect, given their long-standing relationship with MGM, Michael and Barbara were looped in on the deal to sell to Amazon ahead of time. And although they've had to weather the storm of studio mergers and consolidations before, they were said to be very nervous about selling a nearly 100-year-old movie studio to a 21st century tech conglomerate. Barbara apparently told friends that she didn't trust the algorithm-centric nature of Amazon, reservations that were not unwarranted, considering former Amazon executives have criticized the company's approach to development as indeed being overly reliant on calculating risk-based factors, things such as an actor's popularity or what similar titles have done in the marketplace. But even as she complained that Amazon wasn't a good home for Bond, Barbara evidently didn't want to complicate what many in Hollywood viewed as a massive win for MGM, a studio she shared a great deal of loyalty with. Plus, Eon was going to retain creative control over Bond anyway, so there was probably a bit of confidence that they'd be able to lay down the law with their new partners. And it would seem they tried to do just that right out of the gate. Shortly after MGM's sale to Amazon was announced, they gave an interview where they firmly declared that they would not be turning Bond into a streaming series. Michael started by saying, "We just try to focus on making good pictures, and it takes time. It takes a couple of years. Putting all that energy into making 10 or 20 hours of a TV show, that's a big commitment. We'd have to delegate to do that, and we've been very reluctant to delegate." Barbara then followed up by stating bluntly, "It's not something we've ever wanted to do." Unfortunately for them, I just don't think they were prepared for the sheer lack of respect they would receive at Amazon. See, they'd grown accustomed to a sort of deference that once defined old-school studios. When they called, studio chiefs got on the line, and most recently at MGM, that was Mike DeLuca and Pam Abdi, two veteran execs widely known as some of the most filmmaker-friendly in the industry. But of course, they left after the sale, a development Barbara was openly upset about by all accounts. In their place, she now had to deal with people who did not even pretend to care about her dominion over Bond. Rather than respect how the 60-year stewards of this franchise run things, they made it their mission to win them over, which of course really means wear them down. Supposedly, before the sale of MGM was even completed, head of Prime Video Mike Hopkins was already boasting his assuredness that they'd get the Broccoli's to cooperate and allow Amazon to expand the brand, as it were. So before the purchase closed, Amazon executives brainstormed among themselves how Bond could be plugged into their machine. And when the time came to start meeting with the Broccoli's, Hopkins teamed up with Jennifer Salke, the head of Amazon Studios at the time. All indications are they initially approached with pitches for Money, Penny, and Felix Leiter TV shows, as well as some kind of spin-off centered around a female 007. But, just as Michael and Barbara had telegraphed, they weren't interested. Predictably, they also weren't interested in hearing Amazon's suggestions for who should play the next Bond, a list I'm sure was populated by more than a few uninspired tabloid favorites. Needless to say, the folks at Amazon validated Barbara's preconceptions pretty quickly. And it only got worse. In further meetings, Salke was said to have pitched ideas so off the mark that they reportedly made Barbara wince, chief among them being the suggestion to pull back on Bond's violence in order to give him a broader appeal. A misplaced notion I'll circle back to later. But Salke's cardinal sin in Barbara's eyes was of course referring to Bond as content. Predictable as it may have been, I'd imagine it still hit like a harbinger of doom. How could it not when it's so antithetical to Barbara's own convictions about not just Bond, but art and filmmaking in general? From what I've pieced together, it would appear at this point, Barbara made it clear that she, quote, did not feel inspired by Salke, Amazon, or their vision for 007. Enter Courtney Valenti, a seasoned studio luminary within Hollywood and now one of the topmost executives at Amazon MGM. She has a deep background in film development, and her late father Jack Valenti, a contemporary of Cubby, was president of the MPAA for almost 40 years. Given the parallels between them, she's someone Barbara was said to have liked, which led to Amazon's top brass giving her the not-so-secret nickname, the Barbara Whisperer, a petty moniker which speaks volumes to their character. Clearly, they believed Valenti might have more luck loosening up the Bond IP for them, so they had her team up with Salke and another executive named Julie Rappaport. Together, the three of them were tasked not with making compromises to appease Barbara, but with charming her into submission. They even attended a stage show she was producing, then treated her to dinner afterwards. But no amount of sycophantic whining and dining was ever going to make Barbara comfortable with Amazon's plans for Bond. And that brings us to the now infamous quote, "These people are fucking idiots." After months and months of being patronized, that's how Barbara characterized her thoughts on Amazon to those closest to her, as reported by the Wall Street Journal. Naturally, that affront was picked up by just about everyone, and it prompted an equally infamous quote from none other than Jeff Bezos himself. "I don't care what it costs. Get rid of her." Those are words that will forever make my blood boil. To think of the Broccoli's being treated as a blight to be expelled from Bond is deeply upsetting. But it just goes to prove all the worst allegations regarding who these people are and how they operate. In the eyes of Amazon, Bond was the crown jewel of their MGM acquisition, and the Broccoli's were getting in the way. Former Amazon Studios chief Roy Price insinuated as much by offering the crude analogy, if you own a Ferrari but don't control where or if it goes, it's frustrating. So, Amazon employed a negotiating tactic which ultimately boiled down to join or die. Make no mistake, what has happened here is not a torch passing, but a hostile takeover. It's clear now that had Barbara stayed, Bezos and his cronies at Amazon would have made things as unpleasant as possible for her. The rest of her life would have been spent locked in creative and legal battles with a mega studio, which is a thought that not even Cubby himself could endure, lest we forget that he almost gave up the franchise in the gap between License to Kill and GoldenEye.
New people have been brought in, and it's very difficult to make films with all of this interference that's been going on.
He just wanted to make movies. That's what he wanted to do. That's what he was meant to do. The thought of spending his last few years fighting a lawsuit was just overwhelming.
You have to remember, Bond was off the screen for 6 years.
Obviously, people were asking questions. Why isn't there a movie? What's happened?
We therefore commit his body to the deep.
Everyone was wondering, was that it? Would there ever be another Bond film?
Present!
He talked to Michael and I, and he said, I don't think I can survive this. So he said, I want to put it up for sale.
Now, while that sale didn't ultimately end up happening thanks to a regime change at the studio which Cubby found more amicable, it just goes to show that everyone has a breaking point. The sharks over at Amazon seem to have pushed Barbara to hers, and I wouldn't be surprised if that breaking point finally made her feel that she could give herself permission to move on. She saw this franchise through two of the most successful eras in its history, which included a total reinvention that she could proudly proclaim her Bond. So it's entirely possible that she felt like she gave it everything she had to give, and that she didn't owe her father any more. So much of life is about choosing your battles. Barbara's fought a lot of them for this franchise, but at the dawn of her twilight years with seemingly no family successor waiting in the wings, I can't say I blame her for not wanting to fight anymore. She has no way of knowing how long she'll have her health and be able to keep working, so it's totally understandable that she'd rather spend her remaining years pursuing passion projects than battling Bezos. And an interview she gave last summer seems to support that notion.
I have to ask you, Barbara, you sort of saw Bond through an extraordinary period. We just recently heard that Denis Villeneuve has been signed to do the new Bond, which I know is now Amazon. Denis Villeneuve?
Oh, he's a fantastic filmmaker. I'm thrilled.
And
he's going to be doing it.
Removed now, or hands-on, or involved in?
I did it for 44 years.
I know.
And I loved every minute of it. But I'm getting up there now, and there's a lot of things I want to do. I mean, like this beautiful musical. So I'm doing a lot of other things. I have other movies I want to make and other stage shows. So
is
yes,
stage a real passion for you? Because you've got this extraordinary CV that you have, but it's obviously people know you as from the movies, but it seems to me that the stage is almost more important to you.
Well, I always say I got my love for movies from my father and my love for the stage from my mother. So I grew up with passion for both.
So when you combine Amazon's animosity with the personal crossroads Barbara probably already found herself at, I think we have our answer as to why she did it. It's heartbreaking, but we have to accept it. And as the Eon era comes to an end, we also have to accept a cold hard truth. We're spoiled. We've been spoiled for 60 years, and I'm afraid we're on the verge of finding out just how much. Which brings me back to what we should expect from a studio-controlled Bond franchise. Before I get into anything substantive, I feel compelled to mention a rather poignant casualty of this upheaval that's easy to overlook in the grand scheme of things. For the first time in history, Cubby Broccoli's name will probably not appear in the opening credits of a James Bond movie. And I know that's just par for the course, but I really hope it's not replaced by something like Jeff Bezos' Amazon MGM Studios Presents. On that note, I'm obviously not going to have a lot of positive things to say here, but for the record, I'm not saying it's impossible to get a good movie out of this new reality. It's entirely possible. But the concern is not whether Amazon can manage to make one great movie. The concern is what they're going to do with the franchise long term. This series has survived by balancing risk-taking with honoring tradition, and that is not something I believe any studio is capable of doing. Certainly not as long or as consistently as the Broccolis have done it. Sooner or later, the other shoe is going to drop. And sure, none of us can turn over a tarot card and see the future, but there are some debasements that feel more or less like sure things based on what we've seen other studios do with their franchises, the most prevalent of which is probably oversaturation. Throughout the Daniel Craig era, one of the most common grievances within the Bond community was a lack of commitment to releasing the movies on a regular basis. Fair enough, but to all those who have been complaining about wanting films more frequently, I would simply say, be careful what you wish for. Because what we're almost certainly in store for now is an endless barrage of sequels, prequels, spin-offs, crossovers, and all manner of other money-grubbing tie-ins guaranteed to tarnish the esteemed legacy of this franchise. It may not happen all at once or right away, but it is inevitable. Remember everything I mentioned in my intro about who's in charge at these studios now and how they think? Well, I cannot emphasize enough just how little imagination these people really have. It's why we find ourselves languishing in an IP-obsessed cinematic climate. Their ambition is not to make films for audiences, but content for consumers. And of course, the easiest way to amass content is to commandeer and commodify cultural touchstones. So, just how unnecessary and exploitative will Amazon get in their efforts to cash in on Bond's loyal fan base? We'll just have to wait and see. But if you think they'll ever be content to produce one standalone movie every 2 or 3 years, you're in for a rude awakening. Look no further than those early pitches they made to Michael and Barbara. It is not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So however irregular their releases were, I suspect we're all going to gain a new appreciation for Eon's commitment to strictly producing films about one character for theatrical release. And then there's the matter of casting Bond himself. Barbara once said determining who plays Bond is a decision as serious as choosing one's spouse. And Debbie McWilliams relinquishing her casting duties means there's no one left at the franchise who has an institutional knowledge of how to find the right Bond for the right moment so that the series will be set up for success across a new era. Something McWilliams even warned about on her way out. Looking at Amazon's previous theatrical films does not fill me with any great enthusiasm. If they mess with the essence of Bond, they risk alienating a huge audience. Choosing the actor to fill the role is a huge task and not one I would hand over to subscribers of X. For those who don't know what she's referencing at the end there, Jeff Bezos celebrated the announcement of Amazon taking control by immediately making an X/Twitter post which said, "Who'd you pick as the next Bond?" Something I view as nothing less than a classless jab at Eon for how protective they've been of Bond, immediately rubbing it in their faces that he can do whatever he wants now, which may include casting his wife Florence Sanchez in the next film, rumor has it. And while I don't think the next Bond will literally be chosen from the comments on Bezos' post, Amazon will absolutely be compiling all sorts of data to effectively poll a given actor's viability, which probably means no unknowns and no one who's against type. Come to think of it, out of all the damage done by the algorithm focus group-based bullshit at modern studios, casting might suffer the worst. It gets reduced to a process that is at best insultingly superficial. It totally strips actors of the opportunity to prove that they're right for a role. And while I'm on the subject of casting, I found it interesting that the Dalton and Brosnan interviews I mentioned earlier saw both of them expressing concern that Bond could be in danger of losing some of its inherent Britishness under Amazon, particularly if they cast a Bond who isn't of British descent. Dalton was quoted as saying, "That's where it was born. That's what the stories are. It is one of the few wonderful stories we've got in film that is British. The leading character is British. We can call it our own." Likewise, Brosnan said, "It's a given that Bond's successor should be British. It's about preserving a symbol that has been a source of pride for British cinema." Brosnan's choice of words there is not insignificant. A source of pride. That sentiment ties directly into my next concern. Amazon lacks a fundamental understanding of James Bond the character. Not only who he is, but what he stands for. The Broccoli's understood James Bond on a molecular level, and they always contended that despite the blood, sex, and booze, the character in the films were, at their heart, about heroism, a concept the new keepers of Bond don't seem to grasp. One of the big exposés that explored the behind-the-scenes drama of the Takeover detailed discussions within Amazon about the Bond character's place in the broader world, and whether the, quote, valorization of a dangerously violent, womanizing secret agent is what's best for society today. During one such meeting, there was reportedly an individual who admitted, "I have to be honest, I don't think James Bond is a hero," a misgiving which is said to have made the room fall silent. Learning that these are the sorts of discussions Amazon is having not only speaks to an implicit ignorance, but it more or less explains their thinking behind the newly censored posters that debuted on Prime Video not long ago. As most of you probably know by now, they employed some shoddy Photoshop, or possibly even AI, to strip 007 of his signature weapon, making him look more like a male model than an action hero. Now, I'm trying my best to avoid putting on my tinfoil hat here, but I do find it curious that if you explore Prime's Home of Bond section, you will not find a single image of Bond with a gun in his hand. Not in any of the poster variants, and not in the photo gallery, save for one wide shot where Roger Moore has it tucked at his side. Perhaps it doesn't mean anything, but it does feel consistent with what insiders claimed Jennifer Salke's vision was for Bond, that she seemingly wanted to sanitize him in a way that would have turned him into a cookie-cutter spy out of an NBC drama, which tracks considering she was an NBC executive for a time. Granted, she's no longer in the picture where Bond is concerned, but I'm willing to bet there are others at Amazon who have picked up where she left off. Because if there's one thing you can count on from modern studios, it's a misplaced sensitivity towards images and themes that are in any way adjacent to the hot-button issues of today's culture. Which is why it should come as no surprise that the inner circle at Amazon may very well be uncomfortable with the more provocative side of Bond. It's not befitting as the face of their brand, and it doesn't compute with their shallow conceptions of what's marketable to the masses, particularly to the younger generations who have grown up in an era of clean, virtuous superheroes rather than rugged, fallible anti-heroes. So the next concern is what will they do to bridge the perceived gap between what they deem Bond to be and what they think represents the demographics they want to target? Well, naturally they're going to mandate a bunch of ham-fisted attempts to score points that'll have much of the Bond faithful crying woke, which is ironic considering some fans were already complaining about such things through a lot of the Craig era. But the issue is not with concepts and characters which are inherently woke. Woke is a subjective buzzword. The issue is simply poor, forced writing. Creative choices that are made not because they feel authentic, organic, or earned, but because they pander to some pencil pusher's idea of what's popular. And when the studios force the filmmakers to consider what's trending on social media, we get moments like this. But regardless of what you want to call these shoehorned incidents, ask yourself, do you think we'll see less of them with the studio in control, or more? I know my answer, and I wish I could find a more concise way of articulating the ineptitude of studio leadership, but no words can do justice to just how hideously out of touch these people are with audiences. Like, creative bankruptcy doesn't even begin to cover it. Case in point, does anyone remember the Sony leaks? Well, for those who don't, the private servers of Sony Pictures were hacked a little over a decade ago due to a controversy over one of their movies at the time. The hackers released a great many internal documents and communications, including, funny enough, several pertaining to Spectre. But I want to highlight an email from a, quote, creative strategist named Nick Shore pertaining to the studio's desire to gear their forthcoming Spider-Man film towards a younger crowd. Based on the date of the email, this was presumably in reference to Andrew Garfield's second Spider-Man film, which is widely considered to be a prime example of how studio interference can run a franchise into the ground. The email reads, "A rising trend we see with millennials are the really extreme forms of experiential exercise like Tough Mudder, a sort of filthy triathlon, the Color Run, and even things like hot power yoga, veganism, etc. Millennials will often post NBD on their social media after doing it, as in no big deal, also known as the humble brag. Wondering if Spidey could get into that in some way. He's super athletic, bendy, strong, intense, and it's all NBD to him, of course. EDM, electronic dance music, is the defining music for millennials. Wondering if there's an EDM angle somewhere with Spidey. His movements are beautiful, would be awesome with a killer DJ behind it. Snapchat just launched a story functionality, which is sort of day in the life of me told in a series of Snapchats that expire after 24 hours. It has a very VIP quality about it, since invitation only. Getting invited into Spidey's Snapchat circle would be huge and very buzzworthy and cool. What sort of response did this drivel garner from executives, you ask? Well, one unidentified member of the Sony team responded with, "Love this," in all caps. It's also worth mentioning that the individual that email was initially sent to was then company chairperson, Amy Pascal, who is of course now one of the principal producers for Bond under Amazon, but we'll get to her later. The point is, those kinds of tone-deaf proposals are exactly what Bond will have to contend with under a studio regime. Not only that, but this is a character in a franchise that perhaps more so than any other tends to have its identity reduced to its most famous tropes. People think they know Bond because they know the iconography of the martinis and the gadgets and what have you, but only the lifelong fans know how much nuance there is underneath the surface-level frills. And now creative control is in the hands of people who only have a superficial understanding of the James Bond movies and likely have no familiarity with the James Bond novels. By the same token, I'm willing to bet there's not a single executive at Amazon who could name all 25 Eon Bond films off the top of their head, let alone list them in order and tell you which Bond starred in each one. And maybe to some people, that sort of thing seems frivolous. Mere trivia that no one other than the fanboys should be expected to know. But it's not about the trivia, it's about what it represents. History. And something all of these corporate content factories have in common is a lack of knowledge or respect for the history of the franchises they produce. To them, these things are just products. In that vein, I'm sure their insolence will even extend to things like physical media releases. I would not be surprised if a future box set includes Never Say Never Again, because it is also owned by Amazon MGM, but they're not going to understand or respect why it shouldn't be in a set with the Eon films. Speaking of which, regulars to my channel will know that I don't acknowledge either of the past non-Eon Bond productions in my videos. That was a very purposeful decision on my part, because without the hallmarks of Eon, I don't consider them to be true Bond films. And I wanted my channel to be dedicated solely to the official series. But now we're in this uncharted territory where everything produced from here on out will technically be part of the official series, but it won't necessarily have the hallmarks of Eon. And that is a troubling paradox that I still don't quite know how to reconcile with. But in all honesty, depending on what comes next, I'm prepared to only acknowledge the 25 Eon Bond films forevermore. And perhaps that sounds overdramatic to you, but I ask, do you think Amazon can shepherd this franchise with as much care and consistency for the next 60 years as Eon has for the last 60? Better to look away than watch it fall from grace, if you ask me. So I've lectured about the Broccoli's and the studios, but before I wrap up, there is one other group I should address. The poor bastards who now have to indulge the notes of Amazon executives and Bezos himself, aka the new team of filmmakers who have been tasked with ushering in the next era of Bond. Not long after Amazon took over, it was revealed that Amy Pascal and David Heyman would be stepping in to produce the next Bond film. About 3 months after that, it was announced Denis Villeneuve would be directing, and the following month that Stephen Knight is writing the script. Let me first start with my thoughts on the new producers, since so much of this video has been dedicated to the impact the old producers had on this franchise. I briefly mentioned Pascal earlier. She was an executive at Sony during the years they were distributing the Bond films, so she does have some familiarity with the franchise, but much of her career has been spent at the executive level, a studio shill rather than a road warrior captaining the crew and championing the creatives. So if ever there are creative differences between the filmmakers and the studio on future Bond productions, one can't help but wonder who she'll side with. Then you have Heyman, who is perhaps best known for producing the Harry Potter films. I definitely feel better about him given his deep background background as a traditional movie producer, and his work on the original Potter series is evidence of his ability to do right by a beloved franchise, but he's also attached to the shameless HBO reboot, so I do still have some reservations about his creative integrity. Mixed feelings about their respective resumes aside, there is one concern I share for both of them, and that is the sheer volume of projects they each have in active development alongside 007. Barbara, Michael, and Eon only produced Bond, which is not to say that they didn't do other projects in between Bond films, but when they were making a Bond film, it was the only thing they were working on, and it got their undivided attention. For better or worse, they always had a one-movie-at-a-time approach to the series. It was one of the things that made this franchise stand out from all others. They weren't getting ahead of themselves, announcing multiple projects years in advance. They made each film, and the build-up to it, feel like a special event, something to be cherished because there's nothing else like it. But that won't be the case anymore. Not with these producers. They are working on multiple big projects simultaneously, and will continue to, as they work on Bond. It will simply not be possible for them to give it the attention that Eon has given it for 6 decades. And considering the filming schedules alone can stretch close to a year, that dereliction of quality assurance is a big deal. Another thing worth questioning with new producers at the helm is whether Bond movies will even be made the same way. Will they still deliver the same standard of production value that we've come to expect from Eon? Because what sets this franchise apart from almost anything else being made today is that it's never lost touch with what is now, sadly, a bygone era of blockbuster filmmaking, one defined by massive sets, practical stunts, and globe-trotting location shoots. And so much of that old-fashioned movie magic has come not just from the presence of the Broccoli family, but from that of the extended Bond family they've assembled over the years. Key creative figures, master craftsmen, and logistical geniuses who have defined how Bond movies are made, many of whom have worked on this franchise their whole lives. The commitment of these individuals not only brought a consistent efficiency to these productions over the years, but it also ensured that Bond would never lose touch with the grand old filmmaking traditions that gave this series such a gravitas and prestige from the very beginning. All this to say, these movies are notoriously difficult to make, and in a perfect world, the established Bond family would get to uphold the standard, showing the new team how it's done. But in reality, the new producers will probably bring on their people who they're used to working with, and the folks at Amazon certainly have no regard for Eon's elder statesmen, which is why it should come as no surprise that some rather notable members of the Bond family have already decided to tap out rather than wait by the phone. I already mentioned that Debbie McWilliams won't be returning, having said that she hopes the transition can be relatively painless, but it, quote, won't be the same. And she's not the only one. Special effects coordinator Chris Corbold previously announced that he's moving on from the series as well, and I'm sure many others will follow. And with the entire creative family disbanding, there's not going to be anyone in place to uphold the many filmmaking traditions that have set this franchise apart from all others, especially in the 21st century. So between the litany of projects pulling them in different directions and their probable lack of commitment to the old ways, I just don't have faith that Pascal and Heyman will handle Bond with the care that it deserves. Though in all honesty, I'm not sure I could feel that kind of faith in these two regardless. Perhaps they respect it as an institution, and they certainly appreciate it as a commodity, but they, nor any other producers, could ever have the sheer love for it that came from it being the family business for the Broccolis. As a young child growing up on Bond sets, Barbara Broccoli thought that James Bond was a real person. That is a deep personal connection to this character in this series that no one else could even begin to understand, let alone live up to. But for the sake of argument, let's say these producers do give it everything they've got, that they genuinely understand the essence of the character and vow to honor every last tradition this franchise was built upon. Will it even matter if the buck doesn't stop with them like it did with the Broccolis? The great irony in the George Lucas clip I played earlier is that just over a decade after that interview, he would sell his company to Disney, most notably giving them control over the Star Wars franchise. But the thing you have to remember is that he also installed his longtime friend and trusted collaborator Kathleen Kennedy as the new president of Lucasfilm. Surely his hope was that she would prevent his creations from being exploited, but I think he overestimated her ability to maintain the creative integrity of the franchise while under the massive pressure of a corporate conglomerate demanding as much content as possible, as fast as possible. And that is not a knock against Kathleen Kennedy. Unlike a lot of Star Wars fans, I'm not going to disparage her. She had a nearly insurmountable task, and it didn't help that she was just not suited to be a creative gatekeeper. She is an on-the-ground, nuts-and-bolts movie producer, and a damn good one. In fact, she's one of the greatest of her generation, right up there with Barbara. And now that she's left her position at Lucasfilm, I suspect fans will quickly learn that she was not the problem over there. My point is that no matter who is tasked with taking up the mantle of a major franchise, even if they're handpicked by the original creator, it ultimately does not matter if the soulless suits at the studio have the control to override them, which yes is bad news for producers, but even worse news for directors and writers. We now find ourselves in an age where the creative professionals have less creative control than ever, and that's probably why I don't actually have a lot of thoughts thoughts on Denis Villeneuve or Stephen Knight. They're both damn fine storytellers, but they're at the mercy of forces that threaten to undermine them at every turn. Hell, even Villeneuve's announcement was accompanied by the stipulation that he won't have final cut, which, of course he wasn't going to, and he wouldn't have under Eon either, but Eon also wouldn't have made a point of announcing that he didn't. That being said, I do think these guys are good choices. Admittedly, I'm not super familiar with Stephen Knight, but I'm familiar enough to know that he's a good writer, and I was happy to learn that he has a real reverence for the material. Soon after he was announced, he said, "I'm hoping that being a Bond fan for so many years, that will sort of be imbued into me, and I'll be able to produce something that's the same, but different and better and stronger and bolder." Hopefully that means he'll be trying to reinvigorate Bond rather than reinvent it. As for Villeneuve, I think there's definitely reason to be optimistic given his exceptional filmography and well-known passion for Bond, though I will say that none of his films have a particularly brisk pace, which is something this next movie is really going to need if it wants to jumpstart a new era of the franchise. But that's the least of our worries in the long run. I wish I could be more enthusiastic about the potential of Denis, because I would have been quite excited about it if he had been announced as the next director under Eon. But under these new producers at this new studio, none of us can have any idea what to expect. And that unprecedented uncertainty really sort of sums up where I've landed on this new normal now that the dust has settled. What I've been finding is that I simply can't get excited about any Bond news. I'm just too worried about the franchise's long-term future. It's a real bummer. Every new bit of Bond news from now on will be at best bittersweet. Speaking of which, I don't really plan on making more videos like this for every piece of news that comes out moving forward, but I might post quick thoughts on Instagram from time to time. So if you're not following me already, please feel free to do so at the James Bond Countdown. Now, as I finished writing this editorial, I realized that it had really grown into more of a diatribe. So, in an effort to take all of these nuanced issues and condense them into a concise closing argument, I thought I would turn to a far greater wordsmith than I.
I'll tell you the problem with the scientific power that you're using here. It didn't require any discipline to attain it. You know, you read what others had done, and you took the next step. You didn't earn the knowledge for yourselves, so you don't take any responsibility for it. You stood on the shoulders of geniuses to accomplish something as fast as you could, and before you even knew what you had, you patented it and packaged it and slapped it on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it. Well,
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Well, there you have it. I covered a lot of points ad nauseum in this video, but that timeless mic drop from the good Dr. Malcolm perfectly encapsulates how I feel James Bond will be treated in the hands of Amazon when all is said and done. Because it's exactly how every other major franchise has been treated in the hands of every other major studio. It's something that will continue to make me very angry, but also very sad. And listen, I could be wrong. For what it's worth, I sincerely hope that I am. I hope that we enter a new era of Bondian glory and this video ages terribly. But unfortunately, I expect it to age just as well as that George Lucas clip has over these last couple decades. Whatever the future holds, I know this much is true. We have 25 Eon Bond movies, and we always will. Fans of most other franchises only got a fraction of that before their beloved series were diluted by these studios. But we have 25 movies, and to quote a certain Bond anthem, if that's all we have, you will find we need nothing more. So thank you, Eon, for 60 incredible years. I, for one, will miss you forever, and I think history will prove nobody did it better.
Nobody does.
Thank you all so much for tuning into this absolute beast of a video. I promise it will not take another 2 years for my next one, so please do subscribe to make sure that you never miss a countdown.
Bond? Come back alive.